Alright, so I wanted to ask you, have you ever decided to do something that you had no experience to do it, and then on top of that, you choose the hardest version of that thing you're supposed to do? You might not be getting what I'm saying, so I'm going to put it this way, just for you guys. When I was 4, I got diagnosed with seizures, right? So my life was changed forever, right? I wasn't allowed to stay up late anymore, which really was weird trying to go to friends' birthday parties. I had to watch my diets. I had, no sports because if, something happened, I got hit in the head, it could cause me a seizure. And it was like that all the way until about 8th grade, right? So in 8th grade, I got cleared. They told me I can play sports. And my genius self decided, you know what sport I actually want to play? I want to wrestle. Which I truly believe is the hardest high school free sport that you could possibly choose. My little cousin had been doing it in private school, and I was like, I like that. That sounds cool. I was always a big mixed martial arts fan. I was like, well, wrestling might be good for me, and it's probably the closest thing, and it's free, so my parents don't have to worry about it because my family wasn't rich. So I go in, and I start wrestling, and I'm really bad. I'm terrible at it. I'm like 123 pounds, no muscle definition, because I've never played sports. I've ran around in the backyard a little bit, but, I never really trained my body. And then on top of that, I get in and I do my first day of practice, and my mother that morning cooks me a breakfast, right? She cooked me eggs, bacon, sausage, and you guys are like, hey, that's a good breakfast. Well, what I didn't know is that practice was going to be so hard, I literally got sick about 20 minutes into it and felt like I was about to throw up. Which is a terrible first impression on this coach that I didn't know. I had no idea who he was. He didn't know who I was. So all he sees is this soft little boy who's now feeling nauseous. But I stuck with it. Stuck it out. Made some of the best friends that I ever had. Still friends to this day. Still super close. And then on top of that, I felt more accomplished than ever. I did something that all rhyme and reason said, this is a bad idea, and I accomplished something. And it made me feel good. It gave me confidence. I mean, my body looked great too, and I was like, hey man, this is awesome. But then on top of that, my very first match, right? I go in and I was wrestling 125 pounds. I weighed 123 pounds walking around fully nourished. And I get in there, and the guy who was wrestling 125 pounds, I was already nervous because this guy had taken first in counties multiple years. He was really good. He was a senior this year. So, he knew what he was doing. So I was already a little nervous. But then I get the relief that he's not wrestling. And I'm like, oh, cool. And they're like, you're going to get a forfeit, which means you automatically start off 1-0. I'm like, all right. And then my coach comes to me and goes, but do you want to get the first time out of the way? There's an alternative. You can jump up to 130 pounds, even though you only weigh 122 pounds. Wrestle this kid and get the experience. And my mind goes, experience is always knowledge. Experience pushes you forward. Experience is good. So I say, yes, let's do it. Now that went about as good as you can imagine. I remember the whistle blowing. I remember him lunging at me. I remember nothing else after that. And I remember the ref smacking the mat, and I was pinned, and it was over. So now instead of starting off 1-0, taking the win, and living to fight another day, I am now 0-1. And I have to say, I was a little discouraged. Slightly. Not that bad. I was like, I'm new to this. I'm not, But I was a little discouraged. I was like, dang, I didn't put up a fight at all. Well, then we flash forward to a week later. It's a home match. My uncle, who's my cousin's dad, who inspired me to wrestle, they come out. My grandparents, my parents are there. It's all great. I go out and wrestle. And we're wrestling in a private school. And I compete, actually. We make it through the first period, make it through the second period. Second period, he pins me. But for the first time ever, I had scored points on him. He had scored points on me. It was actually a match, and I was like, hey, maybe I can do this, First time, didn't go well. Second time, lost, but I'm still learning. And then I move on to my first tournament. Because if those of you don't know about wrestling, you wrestle individual team matches, and then you wrestle individual tournaments sometimes. Usually you have about 3 or 4 years before you go to the regional counties, regionals, and states, and that's how they do it in Maryland. I get in here, and my first match, I get a kid from a deaf school. Now I know what you're thinking, deaf school. Well, one, you're not prepared for it, but when you wrestle a deaf kid, the coaches typically have to stay in a corner, but with a deaf kid, he's allowed to walk around the mats so that way the wrestler can look and see and read his lips, which is understandable. That was a little distracting, but I pull this out. I win. I beat this kid. And, man, let me say, when they talk about how when you lose one sense, you gain, enhanced, he was really strong for 125 pounds. Like, he grabbed my wrist, and I actually had, like, bruising on my wrist from him, like, squeezing. He was super strong. But I pulled it off. I used it. My first win of my belt. I'm 1-2. I'm like, yes. And then I get the craziest news ever, that my next match, I'm wrestling a girl. And I don't mean this, like, your whole life you're taught, don't hit girls, you treat a woman like a lady. And then you get into high school. Well, now you're considered, you're not a child anymore. It's not like, a little boy and a little girl wrestling, whatever. But you're like, man, what are people going to think about me? If I win, well, you beat up a girl, and if I lose, you lost to a girl. It was like a lose-lose situation. Well, I go into the match, and I'm super nervous. I'm like, I don't even know how to touch her. I'm like, I don't want to grab her boob. That'd be inappropriate. My coach is like, you got to do what you got to do. And I'm like, what? And it's funny because, especially nowadays with all the stuff in sports about, men and women being the same thing, but for the way our state worked, women and guys and girls wrestled together in high school. But I'm wrestling her, and she's not caring that I'm a guy. She's elbowing me in my throat. After I take two, it's like something snapped, and I no longer was looking at her as a woman. Now, I didn't, beat her up or do anything dirty, but I wrestled her, I pinned her, I win my second match, I'm 2-2. Get on to the next day, I get crushed all the way through. Don't place. But by losing early and then winning early still, it gave me confidence to keep going. So I pushed through. Now you may be like, hey, why are you telling us this? This is a story channel. Well, I think sports have some of the greatest stories, greatest storylines, the David and Goliath storyline, the guy who's undefeated. And I want to start talking a lot about wrestling because I realized two things. When it comes to YouTube, you need to find your niche and your passion and try to find them where they meet together. I feel like wrestling doesn't get the respect it deserves. It's one of a sport that I look at as one of the greatest sports of physical strength, intelligence, and discipline. And I think a lot of people in high school, they should wrestle, especially if you're a football player. I'm telling you, it will change your football game forever. You go through and look at some of the greatest football players of all time. A lot of them wrestled when they were in high school as well. And I just don't see... The only issue with wrestling is there's no market after college, except for the Olympics, which is a very limited, space. But I kind of wanted to push it and get people to encourage and watch it. A lot like you see now with the WNBA, people have started watching it. Now it's growing, it's blowing up. People are interested. I feel like wrestling could be the same thing if people got the exposure to it, if people got the knowledge. It's so funny. I talk to so many people. Oh, yeah, I wrestled, but they don't support it visually. And I find that super strange. But some of that I think it's also because there's no opportunities to do it. MMA schools, they have jiu-jitsu and Muay Thai. There's no wrestling, which I don't understand. And then the other thing is, I think we should start doing, like they do Brazilian jiu-jitsu tournaments. Why not do more wrestling-style tournaments? And so I wanted to start doing videos about this because this is a passion. And we'll still talk about other things. We'll talk about the YouTube market. But I wanted to expose people to wrestling. And if you haven't, I truly encourage you to look into it. Watch some of the matches. Learn the rules. Because everyone I know, people that didn't know anything about wrestling, didn't care. But then once they started learning the rules through me, they became interested in it. And, for me, I came from a small school. There was 8 people on my team, but by my senior year, we had a JV and a varsity, and we grew. And a lot of these kids, I don't know, but then they saw how much fun I was having, and they saw how a lot of them, they saw how good a shape I was in, and they were like, I want that. And so they come out and they do this, and they all fall in love with this sport. There's something about it, something about overcoming the obstacles that really pushes people. So I plan on doing a lot more videos of this. I want to show people what wrestling, teach you guys the rules. For those who don't know them, I want to break down some films, because this Olympics that's going on right now is crazy with the U.S. and wrestling, but then there's a lot of other really cool storylines that are going, and I don't think people are hearing them as much as the other sports in the Olympics, and I don't even understand why, because this right here is one of the first Olympic sports other than track and field. But one gets all the notoriety and the other doesn't. And I don't get that. I think 2 things need to happen with wrestling. Some of it, I think they stick too much to tradition. And I love tradition. I think tradition is important in families and in business and in all aspects of life. But when tradition starts killing the thing, you got to get rid of the tradition. It's better to stay alive and lose a tradition than to die on the premise of a tradition. I've been thinking about how to make wrestling more entertaining, because a lot, football, basketball, everything's evolving and becoming more score heavy. Wrestling's starting to do that. They recently changed, now instead of 2 points for a takedown, you get 3 points, which has shot up the scores of things. And I have some cool ideas of how you could take it, because right now there's 3 styles of wrestling. There's Greco-Roman, which I think we leave that. We leave Greco-Roman the way it is, because that is the traditional Olympic wrestling. Leave it the way it is. Don't touch it. If you're not into it, you're not into it, but just keep it as part of it. But then there's freestyle and folk style. And the whole world does freestyle. It's what you see in the Olympics. But the U.S., we do something called folk style. And that's what you see at the collegiate wrestling, whether it's high school and college. High school and college and collegiate wrestling. Both of them have really cool parts. I've done both of them. But I truly think we need to start kind of taking both of them and as a world, kind of starting to put them together to create a better style of wrestling. Maybe even to some degree start catering it more for mixed martial arts without diminishing what wrestling is. I mean, you got so many wrestlers. You have Kamaru Usman, John Jones, Daniel Cormier. All these are collegiate wrestlers who did folk style wrestling, who are now, champions, world champions in UFC. So clearly, this style plays a big part. But there's 2 things I think you need to ask. One, if you're a wrestler that stopped wrestling and you don't ever think about the sport, why is that? I mean, people still watch football even after they stop. So why did you stop watching wrestling, and why did you stop supporting it? And why do you, is it just something you did in high school and then now you're done? Because everyone I talk to, they always talk about how much they loved it. So I don't understand where the disconnect is. And if you don't know about it, I encourage you. So go watch some stuff. Watch Penn State, which is one of the greatest wrestling colleges in the last decade. Watch some of their matches. Learn. I mean, if you know who Bo Nichols is, he comes from Penn State. He's an amazing wrestler. Because those guys give up a lot. They give up so much to be great at this sport. And I'm curious, and you should be curious on why they want to do this. Why do you suffer? Because, man, you suffer in wrestling. You're never healthy once the season starts. And these guys go above and beyond. I'm talking, I've seen guys break their fingers and they just break them back into place, tape it up, and go out and wrestle. Why put yourself through all that for a sport that doesn't really pay? It's not like an NFL player where you'll make millions one day. You're never going to be a millionaire or a billionaire by wrestling. So why do people go so far for it? I think it's just pushing yourself. That's my answer. To see how great you can be. You do it for yourself. And it's one of the most rewarding sports, I think, ever. Because there's nobody else out there except for you. Your coach can tell you everything to do, and if you don't listen and you can't execute it, it's all for nothing. But yeah, so tell me what you guys think about this video. Like, subscribe, give me some feedback. We're going to do some more. I plan on actually starting a Discord for this community. So share the video with your friends. We can go in and I'll break down some wrestling. Some of you guys might have seen on TikTok that one guy who does Take Me Down, Get $1,000. I thought about doing something like that, but right now I'm fat and out of shape, which is why if I do this wrestling podcast I'm thinking about, it's gonna be called From Mats to Fat, because we were all so in shape but now we're kind of fat. But yeah, I just want to thank y'all, and we'll talk later.